People all over the world have had these strange and horrifying haunting experiences of these mysterious shadow people, whether it is through sleep paralysis or even fully conscious. My personal experience was when I was still a preschooler. I think I was 5 or 6 years old. I was messing around with the World of Warcraft map editor and absolutely entertained for hours. I'd play StarCraft and draw on Microsoft Paint for fun too, when I wasn't playing with my toy cars and paper cutouts. My parents were not home. Only my siblings, who were downstairs watching TV. The family computer was in my older sister's room. The door was open, but lights were not on, because eventually, when I started playing, it wasn't dark. I was so glued to the screen, I didn't realize how late it became. At that time, it was very dark. I had eventually gotten bored after hours of fuckery. I was going to go and turn on the light and go downstairs to eat. I turned my head from the screen to the open door of my sister's room. A black figure standing in the doorway. I did not panic. I was spooked, but I did not panic. I looked at it for a good few seconds. I thought it could possibly just be a prank of my brother or sister, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It definitely didn't look like them either way. I decided to continue playing without looking at the scary fucking shadow monster in the fucking doorway, and called for one of my siblings so that they can come upstairs and turn on the passage light for me. Actually, now that I recall this memory, that shadow figure kinda looked more like a woman than a man. Perhaps that is all the hentai artists need to get busy looting a fucking shadow demon. Cool shit. This is my little sister's encounter. Do you believe in ghosts? This was the question my little sister asked me years ago. I believe in demons and ghosts was the sentence that she followed up with. As a Christian, I do believe in the supernatural, despite being incredibly fixated and obsessed with physics and science, but I have my reasons. I'll continue this from the perspective of my little sister. There was an incredibly heavy presence in my cousin's home. Genuinely, I'm really scared to go there, but it was fun to play with my cousin. What really haunted me was the fact that the hallway was especially heavier than any other part of that house. Such an intense pressure, I definitely noticed, and I would always run through it. It felt like something was watching me behind my back, and to be in that hallway makes you feel completely vulnerable to whatever is watching or even hunting you. Your back is entirely exposed, and the only safety you have is your eyes for confirmation. I would throw something like a ball to the end of the hallway and it'd come right back to me. As much as I love my cousin, I just hate sleeping there. I don't sleep with a nightlight or anything, but when it's that house, I just have to. Another place in that house that just feels really scary is the bathroom. It's the type of bathroom that has a laundry room at the back. It just feels as if anything could be back there, watching. It's just a different type of vulnerability, I guess, because this time, you're not moving. And of course, with a house as scary as this, it comes with a backstory to at least make sense of some of it. My late uncle lived in that home. He worshipped something like a god of death in that house, and to be honest, I think it cost him his soul, and he went to hell for it. God of death or not, it was definitely something that tried to scare us. When he he did eventually pass away, my other aunt and uncle moved into that house, and soon I had my other cousins, the youngest having autism. She would be alone in her room, but unfortunately, she looked. It was there, a figure that reflected no light, wearing a trilby hat, standing in the corner of her room, with her fight or flight mode activated by this freakishly horrifying thing. She ran out of her room as fast as she could and into the kitchen, where my aunt was cooking, tears in her eyes, sobbing. It could be the only time she'd ever experienced something like this, but it was the only story we were ever told. One night, 3 years ago, I slept in her room with my cousin. I always take the corner to sleeping, and it was there, just standing, looming there in the doorway that leads to the hall. It was like a shadow. He had a trilby hat, and he was just really scary. You couldn't see him, but you could make out his figure. He was completely black, like a void. The only thing that I could do was hide my face from the threat under the blankets. I saw exactly what my aunt had described. My uncle did in fact worship something in that house, and then he gave the land to my other uncle, who lives there since. Mom says that only those with a strong soul can handle seeing something like that. Any other soul would die at the sight of something so unnatural, something so haunting and absolutely supernatural. A close friend of mine, Maxence, has a cousin that lives in a huge 18th century home built on top of a graveyard in France. What she told me definitely piqued my interest. There had been many paranormal events in that house, and the previous owners even wrote really specific rules and instructions on what not to do in that house, or what to do when you're in a situation where you're facing an attack. In the future, I will make an entire video on some of these bizarre stories and events that happened in that house. I'll continue this story from the perspective of Maxence's cousin. I was being haunted by one of these shadow men for a long time now. I'd often see one in front of my cupboard door, and I believe it was the same one who'd haunt my dreams as well. Whether I was laying in bed or the sofa, I would often see a blackish figure, no face, no features, just the silhouette of a man, a shadow. And one night, I was just laying in my bed, and of course, he was there, watching me. Just watching me alone was extremely intimidating. Your body puts itself into shock, and you just feel as if you're in a troublesome position where you cannot escape easily. That feeling when your heart is pounding in your throat, difficult to swallow. The next thing I see freaks me to the core. The shadow figure begins to rise and get close to me until eventually it's sitting right on top of me. No eyes, yet fiercely staring into me. I heard the man's voice in my head. It just doesn't sound human or even animal at all. Something just completely foreign, incredibly hard to describe. It demanded for me to look into his eyes again and again. The first few times I listened to the voice and looked, it was definitely the same one from my dreams and the one that had been standing in front of my cupboard. But after that, I absolutely refused to open my eyes again. He told me again and again, look into my eyes. And the damn thing didn't even have any. He would begin to assert violence onto me and would try to choke me into opening my eyes. Look into my eyes. look into my eyes. But I kept my eyes shut, hoping for it to leave me alone. Eventually, after a few more demands, I'd been hit so hard that the entire side of my body just felt like a huge slap. I'd been hit so hard that it knocked me out of bed and onto the floor. And when I'd wake up, I'd find the whole half of my body that had been hit still hurting for a few days. Every time I had one of these encounters, I always had an injury. So, one night, I had my dog downstairs sleeping with me. He'd become rather restless. I didn't know why, but eventually I did manage to calm him down. For some reason, he actually begins to start growling. I'd never heard him growl before. Something was up. It was either by the doorway or approaching. There was no door, however, it was just a curtain. Anyway, I get up to investigate, and of course, it's nothing. And I tell him to shut the fuck up, and eventually he does. But then he starts to growl again, and I noticed the power's not on. The lights were off. The little box door for the power grid had been opened, and it was right fucking next to me. I was so fucking terrified, I just went back under my blankets, when suddenly my dog just stopped. No barking, no noise, no nothing. I look to see what happened, and I see him covering his head and ears, scared for his fucking life. I pull him under the blankets with me. I was in a deep state of panic, and after a few minutes, I felt something like long slender fingers going down my back to my legs. I was not cold or anything, but I was actually shivering out of fear. That was all I felt in that moment. I quickly take off my blanket and immediately look around. And of course, there's nothing there. I stayed up, watching over my entire room. I was just so scared. I eventually fell asleep out of exhaustion without realizing it. But when I did wake up, I saw some cloth moving on the floor, and it was my curtain. It was there. That thing in my doorway. It was a tall black figure. I had a little hat. It had white eyes too, but it didn't glow, but very visible. My body was in total shock. I was very stressed and I was panicking too. I stared at the black figure for hours and hours on end out of sheer fear, until eventually the sunlight reached my room through the little basement window, and it just suddenly disappears right before my eyes. It just turned the corner and whoosh, it was gone. I passed out of severe exhaustion and fatigue, only to wake up to not remembering much after. Later, I went upstairs to take a shower, and I could feel something, the burning feeling inside of me. And it was there, the lines, the cuts that shadow demon left on me when it slid its hand down my body. You know, I actually tried to avoid it, hoping to never see it again. Personally, I can only assume that these entities are supernatural, more demonic source. I hope that whoever is interested in this sort of field will find this information to be very useful. Needless to say, these things are damn scary. Anyway, I'll catch you later. Bye bye.